Hey everyone, welcome back to the Read Report. I'm Nicole Ryan. What is going on? It is Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody is out there having a good time. I am super excited to talk about this past week of trial because, as you can imagine, there is a lot to unpack there. First and foremost, the testimony of Shanon Burgess. Now, this guy, I'd say overall, the prosecution has had a much stronger case this time around, given that it basically was a terribly botched investigation from the beginning and that Karen Read was overcharged. All that being said, the prosecution has done a better job telling their version of the story this time. However, if there were one witness in this retrial of Karen Read, there were one witness that was maybe even worse than Trooper Paul, the accident reconstructionist forensics expert from the Massachusetts State Police from the last trial, it's this guy, Shanon Burgess. So trial number 2, we did not have Trooper Paul testifying again. You heard from my interview with Ronnie, the juror from Karen Read's last trial. He said you would think that you would have picked up a book to learn something, if anything, about physics. That's what he had to say about Trooper Paul's testimony. And this time, I don't know. I don't know, Ronnie. I have to see if he's watching, but listen, Ronnie, I think this guy might have had Trooper Paul beat. Now, why do I say that? Well, Hank Brennan, the prosecutor in this case, Hank Brennan will be the first to tell you he's going to try this case with integrity. He is going to make sure that Karen Read gets a fair trial, but he is also going to use science and data and evidence to tell the story to the jurors as to why they should convict Karen Read. Now, maybe up until this far, he's done all right, staying close to his tenets of honesty and integrity and letting the facts speak for themselves. He's done okay, other than being kind of annoying in my opinion, but you've done a much better job than Adam Lally overall, Hank Brennan. That being said, it's the hypocrisy that Hank Brennan has showed with these last few witnesses, namely Shanon Burgess, that really drives me insane, and hopefully is also driving the jurors insane, because he can't come up here and preach how impartial he's going to be and how he's going to play a fair game. And the defense is the one trying to steamroll the Commonwealth's case with these ARCA witnesses. It's all their fault. That's what Hank Brennan has to say. He's getting all fired up about ARCA in these pretrial hearings. And yet, we look at who he has testifying this week. Shanon Burgess, digital forensics expert. That's what this man's title was. Digital forensics expert. Now, listen, experts, as we know from Jessica Hyde, come in all different shapes, sizes, looks, whatever, right? Step aside from the fact that he's got a southern drawl. Maybe that has some unconscious bias on some of these northern jurors. Maybe not. But just step aside from the fact that when you see this guy up there, he's not given that polished finesse, charismatic, charming, handsome ARCA experts vibe. He's given this, hi, honey, I was wondering if maybe you want Chick-fil-A for dinner. He's giving more of that, okay? Again, nothing against Southerners. I love the Southerners, okay? My mom was born in Kentucky. My papa was born down there somewhere. So anyways, all to say, he doesn't give this aura of digital forensics expert in any sense of the word, in my opinion. Okay, then he gets up there. We know from Hank Brennan's direct examination of past witnesses, his expert witnesses that is, that he starts building their educational background. He's up there and he's having them go through their resume and their expertise, what are the cases that they have testified to? What have they done in terms of their professional licensing, in terms of their education? But with this expert, interestingly enough, we know Hank Brennan was tiptoeing, dancing around, asking him all these professional questions except questions about specifically about his education. So again, we've heard other lawyers, YouTube lawyers, come out and say, hey, that's not really anything that's very surprising is what they're saying. Okay, they're saying it's very shocking that Hank Brennan immediately is kind of dancing around this topic, not going to touch the education. We know that's different than his other direct examination of expert witnesses in this case. So take note, right? And then we see that Alessi, one of Karen Reed's defense attorneys, gets up there and he's kind of fired up. He's kind of razzle-dazzled from the beginning. And Alessi's kind of a funny guy, in my opinion. He's very nerdy in a way because he's extremely, extremely effective, in my opinion, as a defense attorney. This guy is smart. He's not super obtrusive. Sometimes his voice, for me, can be a little bit annoying, but that's okay. That's just my opinion. But he got up there and he starts just peppering from the beginning these little seeds of doubt about how Shanon Burgess, this digital forensics expert, came to change his report. Because for those of you who don't know, basically, the Commonwealth submitted this altered report by Shanon Burgess that magically aligned, synchronized the timeline between Karen Reed's SUV and John O'Keefe's phone, the times on those devices. Shanon Burgess submitted an amended report mid-trial several weeks ago. Around May 7th, May 8th, he submitted this report. And first off, if we're just going to talk about anything, at face value, lawyers have said, again, it's YouTube lawyers, but lawyers have said that that's kind of unheard of. Really? Like you get a new report that you have to review mid-trial? And what's even more interesting, perhaps, when questioned a little bit more on that, Shanon Burgess says that he's never done anything like this, as in submitting an altered report or a new report, whatever you want to call it, mid-trial. In all of his cases that he's had, he said he's never done anything like this. This would be the first one that he submitted an altered report for mid-trial. So if that didn't make you think a little bit, he then starts getting into the good stuff. Now, what am I saying here? As you know, you've probably seen the clips, folks. Shanon Burgess basically was looking like a fraud because turns out Alessi, Karen Reed's defense attorney, who was doing the cross-examination of Burgess, and he did a fabulous job on this. I felt like he wasn't leaning into it too much where he could come off as being kind of a jerk to this guy, who again is trying to do his job ultimately. And we know that at times can leave kind of an unpleasant taste in the minds of the juror. Because basically, if you're like being a jerk, if the defense is being a jerk to one of the Commonwealth's expert witnesses, sometimes you just never know what is going to influence a juror one way or another. So Alessi, I think, handled it pretty well, but he showed everybody different copies of his CV, of Shanon Burgess's CV, with multiple misrepresentations of his education. This is a digital forensics expert that the Commonwealth has paid probably a lot of money. We didn't get that number, I don't think, but probably a significant amount of money. Don't even get me started about how much money is going into the retrial of Karen Reed here, when there's really just No reason for all of these taxpayer dollars to be spent this way. However, he shows him all these CVs. Some of them say that he is currently pursuing a bachelor's degree. Others, namely something on the Aperture Company website, stated that he did, in fact, have his bachelor's degree, when in reality, he does not. And not only that, not only was Mr. Burgess's educational credentials called into question, multiple different CVs, but some of them stated that he was pursuing a major at different years. And if we're speaking to what is the most truthful representation, which he says, Burgess testified that this is the case, he has actually been currently pursuing his bachelor's degree for 17 years. And he admits this, folks. He admits to being a downright fraud in front of the courtroom, okay? So this is why this is crazy. And paramount to all of this, in my mind, is just we have the Commonwealth standing on their high horse, claiming how they are the side with integrity. They're the side with the truth. Hank Brennan, the jurors will remember this. Mark my words. I hope you already know this. You probably already do. The jurors will remember this, okay? When they are read that little instruction from Judge Cannoni stating you are to evaluate the credibility of each witness. They're going to remember this because this is critical. Maybe not specifically what Burgess testified to, but it's critical to how they're able to thread the needle. The prosecution is threading the needle of the timeline in this case, and the timeline that they say proves Karen Reed struck and killed John O'Keefe with her Lexus SUV. Now, also, it didn't just stop there, because sometimes his CV, Burgess's CV, said outrageous things, like Bachelor in Science of General Science, okay? And when questioned about that, Alessi said, hey, you realize that at University of Alabama, where it says that you were pursuing this, there actually is no Bachelor of General Science, okay? And then Burgess said, oh, I must have meant Bachelors of General Studies. That's what I meant. But then sometimes it says Bachelors of Science in Mathematics, and sometimes it was so inconsistent. It was all over the place. And also, interestingly enough, what happened in the 72-hour period before Shanon Burgess was testifying? Well, glad you asked. His LinkedIn profile mysteriously disappeared. Okay. So Alessi was kind of asking him, he was like, hey, did you get a notification on LinkedIn that someone from the defense team may have tried to access your profile? He says no. But interestingly enough, his LinkedIn is gone right before this major bombshell is about to be revealed when he's giving this expert testimony. Okay? The guy was a clown, a fraud, okay? Now, maybe one or two mistakes. We all make mistakes, okay? Maybe there was something there. There was a miscommunication between whoever works on the website and whoever was actually asking him about his credentials, or maybe there were one or two errors that were out of Mr. Burgess's control. However, this still raises a high degree of doubt as to how he has managed to, on multiple occasions, misrepresent his professional credentials. Okay? And furthermore, You could tell the guy was getting beat red up there. He was shaking in his shoes, okay? Maybe in that moment he was worried about his job. He was worried about, paying his mortgage. He was just freaking out in his mind. He didn't see it coming. He was completely steamrolled. Maybe there's that. But he just kept admitting, which is good. You want to be honest, okay? I know it's a novel idea sometimes for witnesses that the Commonwealth calls here in this Karen Reed case, but you generally speaking do want to be honest when you're questioned on the stand. But the number of inconsistencies that Alessi was able to slowly pull out of Shanon Burgess was just sheerly entertaining, honestly, because it was just one lie, one misrepresentation, one error on top of another. You can't make this up. So Shanon Burgess absolutely cannot be trusted as a credible witness, in my opinion. All right. And then we learned that it seems as though it's being reported that the Commonwealth only has to call one more witness. So let me tell you, I don't know anything about, legal consultative services and how to advise strategy-wise, but it seems to me that you don't want to be ending the tail end of your trial with this clown show, basically. Because if I were a juror, that would be first and foremost on my mind when I'm read these instructions. However, the defense's case will take some time. Might take a week and a half, I think is what they're estimating. So at least they'll have a little bit of time to swallow that Burgess pill and try to look at the evidence objectively. But it might be difficult. I'm just saying, it might be difficult. Now, we did also get what I consider to be a very strong prosecution witness, and that was Dr. Wolf. Now, Dr. Wolf is a neuroscientist, and he was an incredibly important expert in my mind because he was able to basically rule out the option that John O'Keefe got attacked with a large blunt force object, because he stated basically given the type of laceration that was on John's head, it wasn't a depressed skull fracture. So it really, he says, primarily would likely have been caused by him hitting his head, falling back and hitting his head on something. Again, we don't know what that is. It could have just been John slipping outside on the frozen ground. It could have been something that was unrelated to Karen entirely, right? But it doesn't sound necessarily like John was really struck with something, if you're going to take Dr. Wolf's medical credentials into account and weigh his credibility as a witness, which I think he probably, most sides can agree, he was a pretty good witness. I mean, the guy was pretty much like larger than life in many senses, because he was talking about making his wife a cup of cappuccino. A cappuccino, like at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, first thing he does when he wakes up is like make his wife this cappuccino, which, first of all, the guy's getting up at 4 in the morning. Props to you. Second off, I mean, coffee is fine. Like, coffee's easy to make. I can do drip coffee all day long, right? But a cappuccino, that man knows how to froth his milk. That's a big deal. That is a big deal, okay? And to his wife, he's probably a catch. That's pretty good. So I got to hand it to Dr. Wolf. I felt like he was a good witness. Then we had Hanley. So she was testifying to the shards of glass. So basically, there were a number of shards of glass found, and they're stating that 6 of the 9 shards of glass that were found more than likely matched the cocktail glass that John O'Keefe was seen walking outside of the car with. So according to the prosecution, he had that with him, and then she struck him, and then it broke, and that's why the shards of glass were there. But there were also some shards of glass that did not match the glass that came from the cocktail glass. So it's like, it's kind of mind-blowing to me, because then I was like, oh, maybe it came from, if there were glass inside of Karen Reed's taillight, hypothetically, let's just think on that for a second. If we're thinking, oh, where could the glass have come from? maybe there was glass in her taillight. But it turns out these newer types of taillights, generally they're LEDs, so they don't usually have any light bulb in them. So it's like, there goes that hypothesis. So it's like, where did the glass come from? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know if we'll ever know. So that was interesting. And then one of the other big pieces in this case, which I remember hearing about in the last trial and kind of be like, oh, that doesn't sound very good. But they also testified to, again, this time around, finding these microscopic pieces of taillight in John O'Keefe's clothing. So you want to say Proctor planted taillight at the scene. You want to say Berkowitz planted taillight at the scene. Whatever. Okay, that's your opinion, right? But the microscopic ones, I mean, I don't know. That one's a little crazy. That's a little crazy for me. And I think the largest one was still like either the size or no larger than the size of a grain of rice. So it's like, I mean, that seems a little far-fetched to plant to me personally. Okay. So they were trying to go through the science at this last portion of the case, and I think in some respects, if the jurors are blocking out everything else, they might have reason to believe, okay, it does kind of seem like maybe there was some sort of collision with the vehicle. But then if you're looking at the credibility of these witnesses the Commonwealth's putting on the stand, you look at the lead investigator on this case, who magically Hank Brennan has not called Trooper Michael Proctor, ex-Trooper Michael Proctor. If you look at that, then it calls into question the whole case. And it calls into question, okay, what was the chain of custody on John O'Keefe's clothing that wound up with these little pieces of taillight embedded in them? What was that like? I mean, if you are truly supposed to believe that the Commonwealth has the burden of proof, which they do, and you're given these instructions by Judge Beverly Cannoni, which we'll hear in just a few weeks now when we'll be wrapping this up, which is crazy. But when you hear these instructions and you take all these things into account, in my opinion, it's just wreaking reasonable doubt still, okay? And I do say, I try to cut some credit here where I can. I think the Commonwealth showed up, and their little clips of Karen Reed speaking to elements of their case, supporting different elements of their case, admitting that she was kind of hammered, admitting that the timeline seems to align with the Commonwealth's timeline in this case. All these little things, they were masterfully crafted by Hank Brennan. I think if I were going to try a case that I knew on its face was just, Hank, you've done a decent job. Do I think that you've kind of taken a little bit of a cheap shot with these Karen Reed clips and with the John O'Keefe's mom, putting her on the stand, all these little emotional components? Yeah, do I realize that, that's just how things get done, and when somebody opens their mouth, especially someone who is charged with a crime, they open themselves up for this examination of their statements, because she knew what she was doing when she was giving her statements. So it's just unfortunate. I mean, I think it's unfortunate. It's a fortunate situation all around. It's a tough case. And all that being said, I do want to talk about one more thing today, and that is Mr. Brian Walshe. Now, for those of you who do not know Brian Walshe, he is a Cohasset man accused of chopping up his wife and getting rid of the body and misleading investigators about it. And I think he's also accused of witness intimidation. So he's got a bunch of charges. His case is still pending for that. However, he has been convicted once before of another crime. Shocking, right? Repeat offenders. Wow. But basically, his crime before, he was like an art fraud. Okay, so he stole these Andy Warhol paintings, and then I think he hired somebody to make forged Andy Warhols for him, and then he sold those. So basically, like, his main thing was like art fraud. Okay. So if you see the guy, you know, he doesn't seem like a great catch. Just everything, especially all that we know now. Okay. Doesn't seem like a catch. His wife, however, was this beautiful young woman who migrated from Serbia. Okay. Petite little brunette girl. And she's with this big guy who loves to go to these high-end restaurants, and he wears designer stuff, and he's just, he reeks a little bit sleaze, in my opinion, okay? He reeks sleaze. But obviously, nobody just becomes sleazy, usually. They have a troubled past, and I think that according to reports, Anna, that was his wife's name, she saw that in Brian Walshe. And she defended him on multiple occasions, and from many reports was very good and very dedicated and loving in terms of how she cared for her husband, Brian. Brian, on the other hand, he had some family troubles, okay? And it has been reported, and actually there are court documents out there that align with what I'm about to say. But basically, Brian Walsh's father worked at Brigham and Women's, okay? And he apparently left Brian when he was like 8 years old, okay? And according to Brian Walshe and Anna Walshe, his father was always very abusive to him in terms of like emotional abuse, sometimes physical abuse, just basically degrading him as a human, degrading Brian and calling him a loser and this and that. So dad was not nice to him, okay? And then we kind of learned that maybe the relationship was getting a little bit better between Brian and his dad. He makes all these allusions in this court document, this probate court document that I found. He makes the allusions to his dad leaving him for an alternative lifestyle, and that really put a rift in their relationship. I haven't gotten into what that alternative lifestyle is, okay? So his dad apparently went up and left him, and then even though Brian said their relationship was on the mend, it seems like it still wasn't that great, okay? Because we learn that Brian's dad, when he passed away, Brian and Anna head over to his dad's house. And on the dad's desk, a bunch of papers everywhere. Brian presumably maybe went there to look for the will or to settle things with the house. Who knows why they were there, but he finds this piece of paper, and to my son, Brian Walshe, what I leave is best wishes, or something to that effect. So, Brian Walshe, why is this significant? Brian Walshe was his only legal heir, okay? He had no other kids to leave this to. And so Brian, I think, presumably was like, I'm about to get a little bit of money. I'm about to get a little rainfall on this, and it sounds like he likes money, judging by his career as an art fraud. So he was like, all right, let's see what dad's got for me. Oh, nothing? Nah, that can't be. My dad was kind of out of his sorts with his medical condition. He couldn't really write the will that didn't have me in it. So Brian Walshe, at the time, this was like 2017, I want to say, around then, Brian Walshe goes to court to try to fight it, try to say, hey, wait, my dad, he wasn't in any kind of condition to be writing a will that excludes me. So that's the kind of guy that Brian Walshe was, allegedly, okay? Was and is, because he's still out there, folks. Why the heck am I talking about Brian Walshe? Well, don't you know, we got a connection. Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, lead investigator on the Karen Reed case, Trooper Michael Proctor. Guess whose dirty little fingers were also in the Brian Walshe case? That's right, folks. Trooper Michael Proctor played a role in the Brian Walshe case. Now, why is this important? Brian Walshe, clearly not a very upstanding citizen, I'll say it. Well, it's important. I'm so glad that you asked. It's important for a number of reasons. First, I just want to explain that while, the case isn't looking super good for Brian. I'll just explain a little bit about it before we dive into this. But second, there were searches on his phone that the Massachusetts State Police used Cellbrite to extract. If you'll recall, Cellbrite was also used in the Karen Reed case for Jennifer McCabe's Google searches. So Cellbrite was used also in the Brian Walshe case for these searches. Let's get into the searches. Okay, so with the searches, folks, Brian Walshe, for context of this story, Brian Walshe and his wife, Anna Walshe, had this party, okay? January 1st, 2023. They had this little New Year's Eve gathering in which one of, I think it was like a former employer or employee of Anna's, came over to their house in Cohasset. And at their house, they had a nice little party that, the drinks probably were flying, they were eating, and these people liked the finer things in life. So I'm sure it was kind of a nice night, okay? And according to Anna Walsh's former employee, employer, whichever one it was, they were having a good time. The couple seemed very affectionate towards each other. There were no hints that something was off in the relationship. But a few days later, Anna Walshe does not show up for work. And you think it was Brian Walshe who tipped off investigators, letting them know that she was a missing person? No, it wasn't. It was her dang coworkers. They had to wait until she didn't show up for work for someone to say, hey, what's going on with Anna? What's good with Anna? This isn't like her. Because this absolute swine of a husband of hers, art fraud swine, he said, oh, Anna, she said there was a work emergency. So January 1st in the morning, she just went off to the airport, took an Uber or Lyft or something, rideshare off to an airport around 6 in the morning. On its face, it sounds believable. Until a few days later, the police announced that there was no evidence whatsoever to indicate that Anna Walshe ever stepped foot in any Uber, rideshare, Lyft that morning. And, as you can imagine, they started having their suspicions about Mr. Walshe. So, they were asking him about his movements the next day and the days after Anna Walsh's disappearance. And he said, I went to do some errands. I was doing some grocery shopping, and I was out. I went to Whole Foods and CVS and got some ice cream. Bizarre stuff, because actually Brian Walshe at the time was on probation for his art fraud stuff. So certain things that he was admitting to doing in those days following Anna Walsh's murder, he wasn't actually allowed to do because of his probation restrictions. So obviously that made the investigators kind of raise an eyebrow there, right? But then what really, really raised an eyebrow, two things. First, they realized that Mr. Walshe took a trip to Home Depot. You can do it. We can help. He took a trip to the Home Depot, and it wasn't just a regular trip to the Home Depot, which I'm pretty sure he also forgot to mention to investigators. This was a very peculiar trip to the Home Depot. Why, you may ask? Well, thank you for asking. He, Mr. Walshe, went to Home Depot wearing gloves, a face mask, and he purchased several, let's just say, items of interest. He purchased some goggles, I think buckets, mop, basically just your homemade murder kit. Oh yeah, a couple other things. I think he purchased baking soda. Did they sell baking soda at the Home Depot? He got baking soda somewhere. And then he also purchased a hatchet. And wait for it. Do you think he paid with a credit card? No. He paid all in cash. all in cash. Yep. And then they take some devices from Mr. Walsh's house. They take his phone, they take some of his kids' devices. I think there was a kid's iPad, maybe one or two kids' iPads. And the extraction that they did of these devices, they used Cellbrite, again, something that the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office says is not super reliable. But they used Cellbrite extraction to unearth these mind-boggling, disgusting searches. These Google searches made on his family devices. All to the effect of how to dispose of a body. How do you clean blood off a wooden floor? Does baking soda make a body smell good? How long until body starts to smell? How long until someone leaves or moves or dies or something like that till you can inherit? There were a bunch of them. There were a bunch of them in the days following Anna Walsh's disappearance. And the sad part, I mean, it's all very sad, right? The kids don't have parents and stuff. And just your dad was this absolute turd. And your mom, rest her sweet little soul, is cut up in a million pieces somewhere, allegedly. Yeah, if that wasn't bad enough, they never found Anna's body. They found some items that were probably hers, and I think maybe a bone fragment or two, but her body was disposed of, allegedly. Again, he's innocent until proven guilty, but it's not looking too good for Mr. Brian Walshe. But as we know, as true crimers out there know, we know it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to convict someone when there's no body, right? But, it seems like Mr. Walshe, at the very least, wasn't a very likable guy. And now, what he is able to do, given the fact that some of these key players, these key, arguably corrupt players in the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, namely ex-state trooper fallen from grace Michael Proctor, were involved in his case. Now he's able to poke a lot of holes in his defense. And his latest motion, his latest argument this past week has been a request to exclude these searches. These searches that maybe are some of the stronger pieces of evidence against Mr. Walshe. He is trying to get them excluded because, well, they're saying that they were illegally seized. And also, I haven't read the motion myself, but it seems like Cellbrite may also be being called into question, because if the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office has said in these other cases that, hey, Cellbrite actually, it's good, it's a good tool, but it's not 1000% reliable, they're saying that because of these mitigating circumstances here, that they're able to request that these searches by Mr. Brian Walshe be suppressed. So, I'm afraid that Norfolk District Attorney's Office and the Massachusetts State Police, some of these lead investigators, these forensics jokes, they are poisoning a well that really, really, really is too dangerous to poison, in my opinion. It's far too dangerous, because who knows what will happen with the motion, okay? It may very well be denied, but the fact that someone like Brian Walshe, man, he's a repeat offender. This is not a Karen Reed situation. This is not someone who is unfamiliar with the criminal justice system. This is not someone who's lived a particularly dignified life, well respected at home. No. This guy is trouble. This guy is someone, I genuinely don't want walking my streets. I don't know about y'all, but I'm gonna stay far, far away from South Shore if he ever gets out. And perhaps worst thing of this all is that Anna Walshe, when Brian Walshe was first facing some criminal charges for his art fraud situation, she wrote this letter in support of her husband, explaining the circumstances of perhaps why Brian was the way he was, and speaking to the abuse that he says he endured from his father. Basically explaining, hey, this is why he is the way he is, and he's not perfect, but she was supporting him. And this is what she gets. And I know he's innocent until proven guilty. But I think we can all agree Brian Walshe wouldn't be the type of guy I want to have hanging around my neck of the woods. Alright? And he also was kind of just a poser, in my opinion. Okay, why am I saying poser? Now, his dad was a doctor. He probably grew up with some money, right? But he apparently loved the high-end restaurant scene. And that's actually where he reportedly met Anna, his wife. He loved the high-end restaurant scene in Boston. And he was known to go out with some friends and rack up massive charges. Sometimes it's reported that he ordered a $25,000 bottle of wine. Just cuz. I mean, listen. While I do wish I could just go out there and buy a $25K bottle of wine and not think it twice about it. I mean, when does wine become overpriced? At what point? Wine people, maybe drop a comment. At what point does wine all taste the same? Or does it? Like, in my opinion, you could change a few lives with $25,000. And the fact that he, on a regular occurrence, is throwing around this kind of money, I don't know. Again, it's his money, or it's his victim's money. I don't really know. But he would do that. And then there was this other incident that I read about in Boston Magazine where allegedly he went out with some friends, racked up a charge of over $6,000 on dinner. Yeah, on a dinner, all right? And then he tries to pay the bill. Decline. So what did this man do? He had to leave his watch. He had to leave his watch as collateral. Being like, oh, I'll come back tomorrow. I'll come back tomorrow and I'll take care of it. Whatever. He comes back the next day. And he pays it in cash and then pays a little bit extra to make up for it. Okay, so at least the guy had the decency to do that. That's all I'll give to Brian Walshe. But all to say, the guy loved to wear designer. The guy loved the finer things in life. And he seemingly didn't have a problem fooling people, especially if it put a little bit more green in his pocket. Oh, and by the way, forgot the best part. Brian Walshe was the sole beneficiary of Anna Walshe, his wife's $2.7 million life insurance policy. So that's what that Google search may have been about. How long until the rainfall? How's long till rainfall? Alright, y'all. That's all I got this week. What do you guys think about the Karen Reed trial this week? What do you think about the implications that it may have for Brian Walshe's case? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow. If you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, please do that. You can find the link below. And I hope you have a great week. Have a fabulous holiday weekend. Cheers. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Thank you, vets. Peace out.